Hi, my name is Benedict. This video is about speakers, specifically for those of you wanting to run a studio in your home, wanting to make your own indie records. And there are so many bits of serious misinformation out there about how you can best, as in most reasonably, get going and get usable results. So much of this hinges on the best. What's the best? The most pro-ful thing. And that's a really dangerous thing. Your job is to get a result. Your job is not to get the most pro result or the best result. Because records that actually matter, that last through time, Beatles, Pink Floyd, stuff like that, there are lots of things you could pick on with them being not the best. Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell. A lot of Jethro Tull records are far from the best, based on irrelevant technicalities. But they're awesome records that have stood the test of time, whether you like them personally or not, although I would encourage you to listen to them, like Dark Side of the Moon should be in your collection, because if nothing else, it's an excellent way to make an excellent record that people keep buying 40, 50, however many years, decades later. That's a great exercise, if nothing else. So, the first question obviously is going to be, well, what are studio monitors? We're going to sidestep just for a moment. Quick history. Where did studio monitors start? Well, obviously they're the speakers that we use in our studio. That's it. In the old days, back when rock and roll was, rock and roll, anything, absolutely any speaker was used in any studio. So you simply used the best that you could get, or what you liked, what was available was really the driving factor. Yes, there over time came to be special things, but how did that happen? Well, really, probably one of the most central drivers to that was the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation. They said, well, look, all of you have got different speakers in studios, and we're getting different results from you. They blamed the gear. Fair enough. And so they said, okay, we're going to choose one speaker, and you're all going to use this one speaker. They chose a speaker that many engineers didn't necessarily want, but they said this is going to be representative, this is going to provide a cohesive sound. So seeing the Beeb had to sound like the Beeb, they didn't want the feeling that so many different feeder studios might all sound quite different from each other. So they said a way of helping to standardize that is to have you all working from the same speaker. It's not going to be a perfect speaker, but it's going to be a speaker that means that you end up with something that's reasonable and consistent. So enter the speaker they chose. You can go Wikipedia this. The speaker is irrelevant. They chose something, it was the standard, and people started to get the idea, if we had a standardized experience. Various other things happened. There was a rise of things like studio monitors, tannoy, big reds, what have you. Again, I'm not getting into the technicality of this, so please don't try and ping me on some meaningless technicality. If you need to do that, it means you've probably got a thumb somewhere it doesn't belong. Well, I mean, it's up to you where you put your thumb. And then, of course, enter the very famous, infamous, and very venerable Yamaha NS10, which was this wonderful box with white paper speaker cones that people will say was terrible, but it wasn't. There were some things that were absolutely tremendous about the NS10. Technically, it was very, very clever speaker. In many ways, it failed at its intent, which was to be a consumer speaker, because it was too honest, and people didn't like its brutal honesty. And that made it very attractive to studio people who wanted to hear exactly what was going on. They also found that if they could make it sound good on this NS10, then it would sound great anywhere, whether it was in a little 2-inch paper cone in a tranny in somebody's pocket, to big reds and what have you. So it was definitely a great speaker, and that drove a lot of the standardization, because people were like, oh, well, if they're using NS10s, I'll use NS10s, we'll all mix on the same thing. That's how the studio monitor really came to happen. So the question that also comes up is, but aren't they just speakers? Can't we use anything? And I'm going to say, yes, there really is very little difference between a loudspeaker and a loudspeaker. Obviously, if we listen to something on a little old plastic transistor radio with a 2-inch paper cone up against wall-mounted Tannoy Big Reds or Gen X or something like that, it's going to sound different. But that's missing the point. How it sounds was never the point. How it feels, does it translate, is what matters. If we don't learn to translate, we're nowhere. Just as if we are speaking to somebody who's, German, and they say something, wie are die robots, and we translate that to mean your grandmother's ugly and your dog is stupid, then we haven't done a good job. People are probably going to be upset. So the translation of wie are die robots, Kraftwerk, into we're robots, needs to be reasonable. It needs to represent the intent of the song, the producer, the band, the mix engineer. So studio monitors are supposedly designed to do that. So what's the deal? Well, accuracy is definitely the most common thing that's raised. The logic being, if you can't hear it, you can't mix it. And while to some extent I do agree, there are some issues. The accuracy should be predominantly in the mid-range. Now, the reality is, a lot of what people try to mix, the way that people try to mix, especially when they begin, is wrong. They try to mix, here, it needs to be bassy, because if it's not bassy, it's not manly. And while I get that, we're all suckers for that, it's not the wisest thing. And also they go, but if it's got lots of perfect ting and sizzle and what have you, it'll be great. While I get that, it's not the right way. The reality is, remember those BBC speakers and the NS10s, quite limited frequency range in terms of if we're trying to achieve a perfect 20 to 20. They focused on the bit in the middle. And the most famous speaker for focusing on the bit in the middle was actually the Auratone, the mix cube, or within the industry called a Horatone. They were fabulous because they focused on this little bit in the middle, a 4-inch cone in a wooden box, fully sealed. And were they the loveliest speaker? I'm going to say they were actually a fabulous speaker. They really focused on you had to make a mix that was clear. If you tried to put too much bass into them, they just go blip, blip, blip. And that wasn't good. If you put too much high treble in them, they couldn't hear it. So it was a case of, what do we do here? If this is clear, then this is what people with 2-inch paper cones and their trannies are going to hear. And they were a good real-world speaker. And so that was why commonly studios in the 80s, you saw a set of NS10s, and on top of or beside them, you would see a Horatone. I had a set that were a bit butchered. Unfortunately, a crazy ex-girlfriend stuck her fingers through them, and it just wasn't worth reconing, and I was so sad about it. But I had a lot of fun with them when I had them. So the thing is that the studio monitor is in theory more accurate here. It is not meant to be more accurate here or here. It's meant to be more revealing here and here, and more representative of what is going to translate into the real world, so that we don't get VRZ robots insulting somebody's grandmother and or dog because it got mumbly-gumbly. So it's really important that we understand what's important here. It's not about a perfect flat frequency range at all. That's garbage. There's no such thing as that. It's about, will it give us the ability to hear what's going on? And being flat's got nothing to do with that. So the deal is that a monitor that we use should ideally be reasonably accurate, particularly in the mid-range, which is our mix area. Remember, outside is not our mix area. Also, the big factor now in terms of, well, what's the big deal, is marketing. There are obviously companies wanting to sell you stuff. They're wanting to sell you bent bits of plastic and metal. So what do? They create a demand. They create a fantasy, an illusion, which is built on certain realities, but is Pinocchio-nosed out into the absurd, so that the credulous, the desperate, start to believe it. And that is made worse by people who don't really know what they're doing, or worse, people who do know what they're doing, then peddling this misinformation just so they can make their buck out of it. So the companies do that to some extent by telling you things about their product which are Pinocchio knows. And then certain people commonly looking to sell those things, either because they've been directly paid by the company to tell everybody how amazeballs and this, so they perpetuate the Pinocchio lies, or quite simply because they want you to press their affiliate link. So they build a kind of trust. It's a Jonestown Massacre kind of a trust. It's a cult. And cults can be fun, especially if you're watching a movie about them, but being the victim of a cult is never as fun as you hope it's going to be in the end, because the problem is they take everything that matters to you. And if making a record that works matters to you, you don't want the cult taking your ability to do that from you. So sadly, a lot of marketing drives this studio monitors kind of thing. A studio monitor is still just a loudspeaker. It's designed with certain criteria. You need to understand the criteria of anything that you purchase. Does it fit what you need to be doing? If it doesn't fit what you need to be doing, then find something that better fits what you should be doing. Otherwise, you are being dragged off into somebody else's agenda, or, as I say, entirely likely these days, somebody else's cult, so they can sell you or drain you of certain things. So the question then is, Benedict, what should I use? What do you use? Well, I actually have Yamo C803s. They are a HiFi brand, and they're a relatively cool speaker and a relatively cheap speaker. It's driven by, that's an old mini disc which actually doesn't get used for anything anymore, which is a shame. Mini disc was a great format, you can't see it, but there's a Rotel A10 amplifier under here. So this is entry-level audiophile stuff. Hi-fi has become a dangerous word, we'll discuss that in a mo, but entry-level audiophile stuff, that's what I've always used. I've worked with studio monitors, NS10s, as I said, Horatones, and I owned a set of real Horatones, not the remake, but real ones. You'll also see some other speakers. These were my first monitors. They were actually hand-built by, well, really my father, off drivers that I purchased at the equivalent of Tandy in Australia. It wasn't Tandy, it was Dick Smith. There's an 8-inch dual cone, and I think the brand was Arrow, was a piezo tweeter, and no crossover. It didn't require a crossover. It was cheaper for me to not buy a crossover, so I had these speakers working together. My father was designing harpsichords at the time, so he used his knowledge, which was very high, of hi-fi, like real hi-fi audiophile stuff. He'd built his own speakers, and he built a pipe organ when he was younger, so he knew a fair amount about this, so he designed them kind of like an instrument sound box. Incredibly lightweight wood, so I used those for quite some time, and mixers went into studios to translate to another format, digital in particular, and I'd up on the Genelex, and I'd say, well, what do you think of the mix? And be like, yeah, it's nice. Good enough for me. And these little things, they're off a hi-fi. They're really here as monitor screen stands. It's rarely I use them, but the Rotel has 2 speaker outs, so I can flip to them, and they're incredibly real world. Just a single driver in a, I'll loosely say, ported box. But they're interesting. They very much focus on the mid, so if I'm doing something that needs a lot of focus on that, I will quickly check on those. That's what I've got. So again, coming back to the what should you use, well, that's up to you. Don't ask me, don't ask any YouTuber what you should use. But we'll run over the criteria. So studio monitors. Studio monitors are obviously billed as being perfect for studio monitoring. That's up to you. I have heard some that I wouldn't use for anything. I wouldn't even keep them if I was given them, or if I did, I might put them in the toilet. They were that horrid sounding. And I don't mean horrid because they were accurate and good. I mean horrid just because they were brutally bad. So don't assume that because they've got the word studio monitor on them, they're actually even going to be a decent loudspeaker of any kind. And I'm not judgy about loudspeakers, but I'm judgy about how things feel, and they were just muddy. And so there obviously were also a set of loudspeakers which are still a going range with the yellow cone, and the earlier versions of those were renowned for being incredibly unflat, incredibly inaccurate. People used them, people made records on them, and if it worked for them, bully for them. Would I have had them? Well, yeah, they looked cute, but I wouldn't have used them as my first choice. If it was all I had, I would have used them and just got used to them. Studio monitors can be great, but a lot of what's affordable and cheap is probably relatively poor quality. And by poor quality, I mean they're more of a marketing exercise than an exercise of delivering the best possible for the budget. And this is where you've got to work your criteria, what's important. HiFi. Well, we need to break HiFi up. There is Audiophile. Some Audiophile stuff is absurd. You pay like $250,000 for a plug made out of a certain kind of magic rock. That's bullshit. That's just marketing garbage, so we ignore that stuff. That's not Audiophile, that's just cult. Audiophile being stuff that's not cheap, cheerful, you buy it down some sort of supermarket where the bigger speaker is the better speaker kind of mindset. The guy's probably wearing a polo shirt and some trousers that cost $4, and he thinks it's a step up doing this from being a trolley pusher. Good on him, that's fine. Those things serve a purpose, and I have bought speakers and gear from places like that, so they serve a purpose if you know what you're doing. But Audiophile will tend to come from a proper store, as in I've got these things that matter, the center of my world, from a proper store. So I go and actually listen to them and compare them, and so that you will find brands like, and normally I wouldn't touch a Yamo because I see them as being more hi-fi than audiophile, more home theater. But these were part of a higher range, and they were actually put in front of me by the hi-fi store because the guys knew me. The Rotel, I had an NAD until it popped its caps, and they said, hey, look, the Rotel's probably the way you want to go. They were strongly encouraging me to buy something a bit more expensive that had Bluetooth and this, that, and the other, but that was more because he was concerned that I was going to regret my purchase when I came to want to do modern, cool things with it. Once he understood exactly what its real purpose was, he said, nah, this A10 is going to be perfect for you. I remember you buying those speakers. It's going to drive them just dandy, and it's going to make a good replacement for your NAD with the popped caps. I would have bought another NAD, but you couldn't buy them at the time. So hi-fi, you need to focus on entry-level audiophile. Don't go crazy. Just get entry-level audiophile. It's going to be very representative of the better end of what people might be listening with, and also reasonably representative of crap listening environments. Home theatre things where you get like 300 loudspeakers in a box, all different sizes and this, that, and the other. Generally best avoided. That includes sound bars and the like. It's also going to put in PC loudspeakers and what have you there, Logitech loudspeakers. Logitech did make actually a set of little tiny speakers and a big sub. I'm still running the sub in the lounge actually, and they were surprisingly workable. But generally, home theatre, PC speakers, stuff like that, editor, don't use them. Which takes us to the next thing, cool Bluetooth stuff. Just don't. If you get a decent speaker in it that's either entry-level audiophile, it's genuinely entry-level audiophile, not cult of personality stuff, and it happens to have Bluetooth, okay, fine, but if it's things like, and I say editor, don't. It just isn't going to be worth it. It would be better to pick up an entry-level or even a mid-level audiophile that somebody is selling because they've upgraded. A lot of those guys upgrade far too often, but that you can be used to your advantage, so you can pick up a good quality amp or speakers for an awful lot less. Like my partner was, because she's been writing songs, and the little nasty little Bluetooth tub just wasn't cutting it. It just couldn't. And so we looked around, and I looked at the usual suspects of what you should buy, and you're quickly getting into $500 before you get anything that's even worth considering. That's not a lot of money if you're serious, but it was an absurd amount of money, and so I just kept my eye on used, and suddenly a set of quads came up. Quad. I mean, that's a really high-end brand in audiophile, and they were cheapies, but they were $150. So for $150, you'd be looking at, I don't know, edifices or something that was just truly, well, not edifying, and used, looked at them in really nice condition, $150. So that gives her a far better monitoring environment than she was anticipating. And for a little while I was a bit jealous of them. But you know what? I actually know my Yamos so well. So avoid cool Bluetooth things, avoid home theatre generally like the plague it is. Home theatre amplifiers, often you can tell they're very home theatre because they claim massive power outputs. They can't deliver anything. I think there's 22 watts out of this Rotel. That's genuine 22 watts. It'd be 11 a side, or it might be 22 a side. I really don't care. They're what's called high current. So you pick up the amp and you're like, oh my god, why is this so heavy? You pick up the home theatre thing and you're like, whee! Because it doesn't have a proper transformer in it. You want a big transformer so you get very solid current. This is the difference between home theatre or hi-fi and audiophile. Someone's then going to say, oh, but headphones. You don't need to worry about any of this stuff, man. You get headphones. And even worse, you get, like headphone fixing software. I've made a whole other video on that. No. Just no. It doesn't fit the way the world works. It doesn't fit the way that our ears, our biology, our anthropology actually works. So no. Yes, you're probably going to want a set of headphones. Mine are AKG's K52s. They cost nothing, and they're clean. They're not woolly bass or anything. I can work in them. I can sort of mix if I have to. There are lots of mixes I did with higher hertz for videos, but invariably I would never release those mixes because the biology is wrong. So go watch that video. Headphones, no, strike them off at any price. They serve a purpose, but not for mixing. Probably not for tracking either. You need them in tracking for isolation, but in terms of saying, oh, but I'm going to hear accurately here, no, you won't. And the other one is subwoofer, and we'll scoot forward again to this picture where people will say, oh, well, if you can't hear it, then how can you mix it? And, I make bass music. Okay, if you make sub music, as in music that can only be heard on a sub, then you probably need a sub to mix it. But honestly, why are you doing that? Because you've got an audience of nobody. That's really, really stupid. Unless you know who your audience is and they are lined up to buy your music that only works on a sub. If you are remotely sane writing songs or anything like that, remember, you mix here. And if you can't feel what's going on at around 50 or 60, which you could just fine in NS10s, despite them cutting off at about 60. If you can't feel it, then you need to either learn properly under the tutelage of somebody who knows what they're doing, or hire somebody who knows what they're doing. And that's not some idiot who goes on about, it's somebody who actually knows what they're doing. So headphones and subs, they're both kind of a no-no. I have considered, would I be better with a sub? Yes, I'd be able to hear a little lower, but would it benefit me at all? No. I do have that sub, as I say, in the lounge. There's nothing brand name about it. It's actually mismatched between the amp and the main speakers, but it's there, it's set up right. You can't hear it until you turn it off, and then you go, oh, I've lost some. And I will check mixes there if that's important, and I will soon know if it's wrong. That's just about experience. If you don't have experience, you cannot get experience by buying technology at all, whether that's things designed to fool you into thinking that you're getting better results than you are. You can't buy experience other than with hard work. So the question is, what really matters then? As I said, it's criteria based on what you need, but what you need is the ability to translate. So that when you pick up a song, any song, and you listen to it on 2-inch paper cone, on a telephone, my phone's being used, it's my camera, so I can't wave it in front of you, any phone, iPhone, Android phone, whatever phone, somebody's laptop, if it translates reasonably there, obviously you're going to miss almost everything out of the mix, but if it translates well, remember, if we've mixed for here, it will translate super well, even if all of this is missing. It will translate, then you have done the right job. If it doesn't translate, either you've got crazy ideas and thinking that you're supposed to hear subs on an iPhone. No. If you can't hear any of the bass and kick drum in any way, then you just mixed it wrong. And if you're saying, oh, but you need a sub to hear it properly, it's like, well, you're probably going in the wrong direction, because most of your potential fans will be listening to it on an iPhone or horrible speakers or in a Bluetooth tub, which has no way of reproducing those frequencies whatsoever. So you need to learn to move into the center of the mix area, not be focusing outside. So what matters is translation, and how we get to translation is by knowing our speakers, knowing our environment. And knowing that our environment is perfect is not at all like knowing the environment. If we walked into a perfect environment, assuming such a thing could even exist, we'd have to get used to it, otherwise we'd make strange mixes. The first thing that we need to do is to know our environment, so know your speakers. And the way to know your speakers is called referencing. These days, referencing is about putting somebody else's song in the top of your door and constantly A-Bing. That's not referencing, that's just stupidity. That's like pissing on your own foot. It's just stupid. It means you don't know what you're doing. I don't care how popular or cool you think it is. It's wrong. Referencing is about coming into your environment. You can see my environment here. Now, the first thing that I did when I set up here, and the first thing I set up in the last few places where I've been and had these speakers, when I first got these speakers, I put them in and I said, okay, I'm going to get used to these. When I first started playing them, they felt wrong because they were different. Now, a lot of speaker manufacturers, like I said, it's marketing, it's about a cult. They make them sound amazeballs, so when you first hear them, you go, oh. But it's just because they sound different. But they're different in a way that's designed to be flattering, not designed to be good or useful, to be flattering. That's marketing. A better quality speaker, a more, let's say, accurate, realistic speaker, will commonly sound worse when you first start listening to it. You'll be like, what am I being? Oh, I don't like it. This is normal. This is kind of a good sign. That's why people didn't like NS10s initially, because they were too honest in certain ways. They were too technically correct. They're very Japanese. They'd thought and they'd got it too right. And so that's why people didn't like them. So the thing is, you listen and you reference and you get used to. Just as if you are listening to broken music or somebody who's singing out of tune, after a little while you get used to it and you start to go, that's normal, and you flip across to something that's decent and you go, oh, that sounds wrong. That's because you've referenced, you've gotten used to, you have habituated. So referencing is about habituating. What we need to do is to listen to good music, and it's really important. I'm not using the term good based upon an emotive criteria. I'm using it based upon the fact that it's actually quality. Now, it's very tempting to say, well, I only make Gabba hardcore, turtle, this, that, and the other, so I'm only going to listen to that. Well, okay, there's sort of a point there. You're habituating to your genre space. But a lot of that is not necessarily good. A lot of it is breaking a lot of rules. And if you spend a lot of time listening to too many indie people, as in wannabes, and I don't mean real indie, I mean wannabes online, who are singing out of time, out of tune, their mixing is atrocious, They sung their vocals in a cupboard with pillows around them. It sounds creepy. You get used to that and you start going, well, that's my target. If you're being clever, like Ramones' first record, they were in a studio, and a good studio with a good engineer, and they very cleverly said, let's make this sound like garbage. Let's make it sound like it was recorded in a back alley in a garbage can. That's clever. That's called meeting your audience. It's not about the quality of that. It's about the quality of the artwork. So listen to good music. Now, you're not listening for frequencies. You're not listening to say this is... You're listening for feel. How does it feel? And you have to simply take your time. How does it feel? If it feels like it's engaging, not like it's blammin', man. That's like drinking beer and saying I'm happy. You're not happy. You're just full of beer and you're deluded. I'm sorry. You've got to find the feel and the engagement. And great music will do that. And you haven't trained yourself to understand great music, well, I don't know what you plan to make, but I would strongly advise that. I will discuss my go-tos in this. Then you're going to want to look at your positioning, as you can see here, and people will scream and try to tell me all about how wrong this is, and I merely have a middle finger to answer you. Go deal with your stuff. I bet if I asked to hear your mixes, there probably would be none. Like if I walk over to your YouTube or your Facebook, I'll probably find no music. And if I do, chances are it will sound like shite. So all of this going on and on about technical stuff is you've merely just fallen into somebody else's cult. I am sorry to hear that from you, but fix that rather than trying to fix me. So this works for me. Technically, we're outside of a perfect equilateral triangle, but just behind here, what you can't see there is a couch, which is far more in the equilateral triangle kind of thing. These are awfully close, and they become a little like headphones, but we've still got air, which again, if you're wondering about that, go see the other video on headphones. So I've got the speakers. They're not heavily angled in. They're slightly angled in because they are so far out. They're so far out because of my screens. I would pull them in a little bit if it wasn't for so desperately wanting to have 3 computer screens, because it's useful. So it's driven by practicality. They angle in just a little bit, but not fully. You know, this whole sort of have to point at my ears thing, it's a bit stupid. Do what works for you, but you're going to end up with a lot of extra difficulties. Yes, being this close does change my stereo perception, what have you, a little bit, but I'm still checking elsewhere. And that's all that matters. It's how it feels. And if I've listened to good quality music, and I understand how it feels when I go to work my mixes, my clients' mixes, to have them feel the same, not to sound the same. Forget this concept of sound, and it should have the same levels, the same line, the same... You're lost. Does it feel like this? If I listen to the Pretenders' Brass in Pocket, and then I'm mixing something that's in any way vaguely similar, does it feel like that? Assuming the band that I'm mixing is anywhere near as good as the Pretenders. If it does, then I'm going in the right direction. That's all that matters. So listen to good quality music and how it feels. Your positioning is about getting that point where the speakers come out and they feel right. Now, in Stav's Mixing with Your Mind books, it's over there, he talks about that as the flame, and it sounds like nuts. But he's right. There's a point at which things come out and they just feel right. That's the feel. So find your positioning. I will show you here. Here's one I prepared earlier. Here is a room. It's very rare that we work in square rooms, and probably just as well. We invariably work in a room that's longer on one side than another, occasionally in a room that's got a cutout in it of some kind. You know, this is your grandmother's bedroom, or the cupboard, or whatever. So, but our floor plans generally tend to be longer on one side than another. It is very tempting, and people will even tell you to do this. Now, I learned not to do this when I was a function DJ. You walk into the room and they say, oh, look, there's the stage on that end. How many people have you got tonight? Oh, we got 20. How big's your room? Your room's fit for 200-300 people. You got 20. If I stand on that stage and put my loudspeakers here and blast them into an empty room, there is going to be a ghastly slapback. Nobody's going to be able to hear a thing, which means they'll start talking louder, and I will feel the need to turn this up, or they'll be telling me I need to turn it up because they can't focus it, because there's this ghastly slapback. The louder we go, the more slapback. So as you see, this room is pretty hot, and we've got this nasty slapback, which is quite late because of the length of this room. And even in a small room like this one, I'm not going to do it, but if you go into a room and stand there in the center, clap your hands loud and listen carefully. Up around the ceiling, you'll hear this little whine. You'll be able to hear a chicky, chicky. You want to reduce that as much as possible. We'll get into that a little bit more later and get carried away with yourself. So this is not the positioning that you want. Yes, you can see this seems about right. Sitting inside the speakers is a lot like mine, but it's not great because you're going to create a lot of problems. You're just going to keep turning that level up, which makes the room hotter and hotter. It bounces back at you more and more. You need to be in what's called the near field, as in you want the speakers to be louder than the room. Now you can see it here. Speakers, lovely NS10s. They've got their propagation, the sound that's coming out of them, and the walls around here, you see how this is basically white in here, so speaker sound here, and then it starts to get a bit pink on the outside, which is bounce back from the walls. And again, we're going to cover this in a moment, so don't start applying your thoughts to what you should do here. The whole idea of near-field monitoring is you get in so that you are hearing the speakers louder than bounce back. You can never get rid of bounce back, and nor should you try to get rid of bounce back. It makes for weird. So if we go back here, if we move now to sideways, we get ourselves within the near field of these speakers. And you see how we don't have to run them as loud? We've got shorter distance to our back wall, therefore our bounce back is shorter, it's tighter, it's less noticeable. We are not going to have to turn up as loud to counter the bounce back from here. So we reduce the bounce back by A, not having it as loud in the first place, and B, not having to fight with it as much. So we're better off. So our positioning, we want to have our workstation, our head, and our speakers fairly even. Sometimes the world does not allow for that, and you end up having a speaker here and a speaker here. Sorry, there's a truck outside. You just got to do the best you can. That's not ideal. Try where possible to do this. The main things that we want is to not have our speakers obstructed, as in there is nothing between the speaker and my flabby ear holes. If we do have anything, it will change what we hear. It will occlude, as in might block some things, or it'll create bounces. So if you've got a desk and you put your speakers on the desk, looks cool, looks like a nice photo that you get off a stock site of morons, but especially if you've got a glass table, the speakers here will bounce their sound onto the table and up at your head. So you're hearing the speakers and you're hearing this bounce, which will be really bright. If you want to say, oh, how does that work? And I don't actually have one, but we use this. If you get a glossy magazine, they're harder to get now, but anything that's a bit glossy, and you angle it like this between the speaker and your ears, if you do it like this, you'll hear this funny sort of phasey sound. You can actually hear the bounce. So you just don't want anything between you and the speaker, or anything for it to directly bounce off between you and the speaker. It's going to bounce in the rest of the room, but just nothing so direct, because you're going to hear that, and it's going to you're going to start to accept it as normal, and you kind of don't really want that. So that's your main positioning. That's really all that matters. Get to know it. People are going to talk about room treatment, which I've sort of looked around at here already. Remember, we need to focus on the middle. So long as we are close in the near field of these speakers, which is here, then we should need to do little to no treatment. Okay, if you have decided to use the empty room in your house, which is commonly what's going to happen, then don't leave it as an empty room, because you will get a lot of bounce back, because it's not a normal room anymore. You'll see here I've got a couple of couches, and I literally have couches. I've got one there and one behind me, which is a monitoring position for the one behind me. But guess what? They absorb sound very naturally. I have no room treatment. While room treatment is a thing, most of what you see online is not a thing. Well, it is a thing, but it's a cult thing. It's not the real thing. So just don't do it. If you do not know what you are doing, if you are not an expert, and following somebody's YouTube video who pretends to be an expert does not make you an expert. Okay? Being a horse whisperer, just having watched the movie The Horse Whisperer, you are not a horse whisperer. You are going to be a victim of the horse's hoofs. You might know that such a thing becomes possible, but horse whisperers are probably naturals at that and have spent some time learning to be better at whispering to horses and having the horses go, yeah, dude, I'll work with you on this one. So don't go trying to treat your room yourself, other than pop in a couch or two, assuming they're available, windows and what have you, just hang some curtains. As you see, mine are bed sheets, because I'm a lazy bastard. I do actually have a freezer over there, and there's actually a bed sheet hanging between me and the freezer, really just to break up the room a little bit. I have a garage door over there, a rolling garage door. It's permanently locked now, but I do nothing to cover that. It's out of my area. Will I be getting bounce back from it? Kind of. But you know what? The reason I know this room is okay is that when I walk into it from the tiled lounge room outside, there's a sense of peace. Note I said the word peace. So it feels good in here. I don't care whether it's good on somebody's stupid meter. I care that it feels peaceful. It doesn't feel weird dead. If you walk into a room and it feels weird dead, all you're going to do is weird in that room. So don't do room treatment. And I mentioned it before, things like going into the cupboard and hanging blankies and pillows around yourself. Never, ever, 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 ever do that. If you think that you're going to create a quiet sound booth for recording, you're going to create a weird sounding recording, because you don't stop bounce back. You merely make great big holes in it. And the holes in it mean you're going to get more of the stuff you don't want, but don't realize you don't want. So it's better to have an even bounce back than it is to have a weird one. Because once you've got weird on tape, you can never get rid of it. Anything a mix engineer does with that will merely exaggerate the weird. There are ways to slightly offset some of it, but it'll still be weird, because you did something weird when you were recording. So going into a box of pillows or egg cartons or whatever is fashionable on YouTube idiot videos today is going to do you more damage. In terms of monitoring levels, how loud should you run? Well, not too loud, because remember, your job is to be within the near field and not lighting up the whole room. Lighting up the whole room might make you feel rock and roll like a pansy, but the trouble is your job's not to be a pansy, it's to be a mix engineer at this point. So I've made a whole other video to it, I'll point to it, but basically you set up your power amplifier to set its knob to the loudest level that you're going to need when your output from your audio device is set to 100%. And we will call that A, normal listening, which also happens to be the level at which we master. I never do my final mastering, my final levels, without being at position A. I see people try to do it at position B or position Z, running at like Boeing levels. Stupid, really stupid, because you can't hear squat. Your own brain's compression has come in. But when I'm composing, terrible spelling error there, I just realised I've had this for years. Composing and mixing, I run at level B. So that's just my knob on the front of my audio interface. The output level is at 50%. I leave it at 50% because if people send me stuff on YouTube which is like running at -1 LUFS or something absurd, then I can pull it back a little bit whilst I torture myself with listening to it and then invariably go, thank you, but no. It also gives me a little bit of push and a little bit more push here because occasionally you get sent things which are outputting at -128 dB and people haven't realized that it's stupid quiet, so at least it gives me some flex to solve it. And also movies, because I will watch movies in here. Some movies are just far too quiet, invariably because the 5-to-1 collapse to 2-to-1 was done wrong, so you have to turn it up. But that will be 6 or 12 dB of boost between the two. It's not anal, but I just know that it roughly is, because if I'm listening to something and I should have my volume knob there in the A position and it's just too quiet, I turn it up to my B position and it sounds like, hey, that's kind of roughly where it should be, and I've got a level meter on the little Evo thing that I use here. I can just tell you that's half of what it should be. And people are, how do you know? It's just like, it's called experience, dude. So in terms of your monitoring level, it should be normal listening level for a room. If you are running stupid loud, you need to learn to pull that back because you're going to make wrong mix decisions. Again, there's a whole video on that. So now, as I promised, this is a fairly long video, but it is actually a more involved subject than people think. And I have to talk about what's wrong so you can actually go, okay, now I can contrast that. My personal choices, you don't have to watch this. My personal choices when I'm setting up and referencing my new room. Remember, referencing has nothing to do with obsessively A-Bing things at all. It's merely getting used to how does this feel in here. The very first thing that I listen to, and even when I'm testing gear, if I'm saying, oh, I want a new set of speakers or something, I'll walk in with my copy of Alan Parsons' Eye in the Sky. It starts with this instrumental Sirius, and as soon as the guitars start chugging, if they sound like somebody's banging a cardboard box, thank you, can we listen to something else? I don't know whether that's a flaw in the record or not, but it sure will show you flaws in a system if they're out there. I will then just generally listen to some or all of the record, and the last track, When I'm Old and Wise, it then has an orchestra come in, and it's not, by modern standards, the widest range recording, but it is a beautiful record, and it's all about feel. If you watch Alan Parsons in interview, he's all about feel, and that record feels fabulous. So if it passes that and I'm like, yep, this is feeling good, this is feeling like it should, feeling like the song should feel, not about technically this, that, and the other with my meter, my idiotometer. So does it feel? Okay, great. As I said, I had to get used to these speakers when I first got them home and I put on my Eye in the Sky. I'm like, but I knew that that was going to happen. And these are technically the best speakers I've ever had. I've had other speakers which are good, but these are technically the best. And I got used to them, and it's like there's that point where when I'm old and wise, the orchestra comes in, it just opens up, and that's what I'm looking for. Does it open up? Cheapy speakers, it sort of doesn't open up, or it doesn't open up as much, simply because they haven't got as much to offer. This offers that because it's dynamic, it's open, and it has to feel that way. So it's all about feel. I will then check Pink Floyd. It's either or, A Momentary Lapse of Reason or The Division Bell. They are both technically beautifully recorded, as well as being absolutely fabulous music. And I will listen to them for just that sense of perfection, because they are perfection as records go. Whether you like them or not, in terms of recordings, they are perfect. So that's what I'm feeling. It's like, but again, I'm more interested in the feel of the music than I am in any kind of technical perfection. Once I'm comfortable with that, I will commonly pull out, and they're an Aussie band, so it's not always super easily available overseas, but a band called Cold Chisel. Their first record sounded like it was recorded in an outhouse. It has a scratchy kind of a sound to it. It's an incendiary record. Absolutely amazing. And there's a slow song, a slow bluesy song at the end of it. Just how many times? And I put that on because it's a flawed recording of a band that's truly superb, and get more superb as they go, or at least for a decade. And so that gives me the chance to feel the imperfections and how does the speaker, how does the situation, how does the room handle those. So I get used to those as well. Commonly, for no other reason than it just turned out this way, the first thing that I'll commonly really sit down and just listen to, because referencing, remember, is about listening, it's about getting used to. So I'll sit and listen to a lot of music before I start trying to do my own, let alone client work. But the first thing that I'll put on is commonly Duran Duran's first album, the one called Duran Duran. It starts with Girls on Film, which was never my favourite song. It's an amazing piece of work, but it's just a bit overdone and a little bit twee, but the rest of the record actually sounds lovely. It's a really nice mix and a really great record with lovely depth in it. It's a personal choice, and I know it so well for having listened to it for decades over lots and lots of different things. So I'm just after the feel. I want to feel enveloped in the Durans and that record in particular. And I just go from there listening to whatever, listening to stuff off YouTube, listening to everything, just getting used to how does music feel. How it feels is what matters. How it's going to appear on some idiometer is not relevant to anyone. It's how it feels. So I mentioned the Pretenders Brass in Pocket. The first time I heard that, saw it on the 12-inch black and white TV, the little speaker sitting in the front, and it's like, the same with Clash's London Calling. That would have been, actually no, it was on the same TV, Clash's London Calling. I remember the first time I saw it on the music show Countdown, and it's like, my world changed. Was the quality good? No. Was the song powerful despite all the technical limitations? Hell yes. And we know that because London Calling is a if you don't own that record, you're not serious kind of a recording. So how it feels is what's important. So conclusion here to round it all off, it's 50 minutes, 52 minutes, is there's a lot of hype. Unfortunately, a lot of it is wrong. It's about people's marketing and people trying to sell you their agenda to get you into their cult. Fine if that's what you're about, but if not, if you're about actually getting the best results that you can, it does take time and energy, but the thing to focus on is what's important to me. What's important to you, hopefully, will be what's important to you, which is the music and how it feels. And the speaker that you want to get is, well, firstly, see what you've got available. Use what you've got. Don't go thinking that you need something different before you can make anything. Learn what you've got, and that is referencing. Reference it. Get out amazing recordings, records that matter and have amazing feel, and learn how that feels. You're not listening to be like, oh, but their bass is this and that. That's bullshit. That's cult stuff. How does this record feel? Because when you make your record, it's not going to be the same as their record. If you're trying to, it's going to be a bad record. Don't do it. Your record's got to feel the way that your record feels, but you feel how whatever records you're using feel. The Beatles, Black Sabbath, whatever, Duran Duran. Your record's got to have a similar sense of feel in how it comes out of the speakers. Once you get that, then you're better off. If you decide it's time for new speakers, then you're going into it for, like, what helps me to feel more of what I'm looking for. And yes, they may be more technically accurate, but that's not important. It's about being able to do more with what you've got. If you have questions, make sure you watch the whole video, pop them down below. Get out there, have a great day.